the panel have seen a great need in our communities with surges in domestic violence cases. And I think that we all need help identifying maybe some of those around us. Some of us might be experiencing that in our home. And so some of our topics are probably maybe feel difficult to relate to, and this might be one of those. But people need resources everywhere. So I'm super grateful that Dr. Jody has joined us to share with us some of her experience and probably a lot of information, probably way more than we can fit into a webinar about this topic and how we can help people get help and get help ourselves if we need it. So thanks to all my colleagues that are here, and love you all and glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. Vicki, you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks for being with us again, Dr. J. I'm really, yeah, what an important topic. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about it. This is something that's happening more and more with people being locked down. Well, don't say locked down, right? With people having to quarantine together. So I'm looking forward to this presentation. Thank you so much. I'm Vicki Lucas with Equanimity Interventions. I do interventions on everything Shannon Clay just talked about. Substance abuse, crisis interventions, adults, adolescents, eating disorders, you name it, we do it. I also do transportations, and we do some case management. I have 15 people that work for me that do safe and sober transports. We also do sober or safe companion jobs. We just try to be a one-stop shop. So anyways, more importantly, I want to hear about the topic, and Shannon laid it all out for you, and so did Jeremy. So I can't wait to hear from TJ now.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicki. TJ, you ready?
I am ready. Thank you, Jeremy. Huge thank you to Shannon and to Vicki. And of course, Jeremy, so incredibly grateful to partner with you with this important webinar series. It's been really, really rich. I've missed the last two. I've really missed it as part of an anchor in my week. And I'm really excited, Dr. Jody, to meet you and to hear your topic, even though I was going to say I'm really looking forward to domestic violence. I really mean that I'm really looking forward to the topic. It's really important. As we know, those of us who work in this field, we do experience a lot of joy and happiness, and we also experience a lot of people going through some of the most difficult times of their life. So I am TJ Woodward. I'm the creator and CEO of Conscious Recovery. Conscious Recovery is a treatment modality focusing on the wholeness of every individual we work with rather than their brokenness. So if you want to know more about how Conscious Recovery can support your treatment program or your practice, consciousrecovery.com. And I'm going to start us with a very brief moment of mindfulness. So I invite you, wherever you are, hopefully it's appropriate for you to gently close your eyes. And we begin by taking a nice deep conscious breath together. And on the exhale, simply allowing ourselves to become fully present. Tuning into the frequency of gratitude. Gratitude for our connection, gratitude for our ability to support each other, to open up, to learn, to explore. So I know that every word that is spoken from inner wisdom. And we receive it with our open ear. Knowing that our time together today is blessed and filled with wisdom, information, connection. We simply open up to the infinite possibilities now of our time together, and we'll just take about 15 seconds in the silence. And then allowing ourselves to gently bring our awareness back into this time and space. And as it feels right for you, I invite you to gently open your eyes.
Thank you so much, TJ. Thank you. And before I read Dr. J's intro and get started with the presentation, I also wanted to let you guys know watching that this is a difficult topic, and Dr. J, myself, and Shannon put in a lot of time over the last week compiling a bunch of resources that we have. So one thing that we wanted to be really careful of is we didn't want to talk about domestic violence for an hour and then just wish everybody good luck if there are people watching that are in a less than desired situation. So in this week's email, we're also going to include tons of resources for domestic violence, whether you have resources or not, and that apply to anybody, no matter where you are. So just wanted to name that before we get going. That being said, for over 4 decades, Dr. Jody has worked in many venues, from inpatient, daycare, and outpatient to private practice, prisons, and coordinating the first impaired physicians program in Northern California, the director of an EAP program at a hospital. She has designed strategies for helpers during genocide commemoration in Rwanda and presented at an international refugee conference in Antwerp, Belgium, with Jean-Pierre
Nagijimana.
Okay, there it is, who is a Rwandan psychologist. She spent the last 4 decades devoted to learning about the impact of stress on the brain and body from her mentor, Mary Dahlman, PhD, an emeritus professor in physiology and neuroendocrinology at UCSF. Boy, this is a mouthful. Although Jody will frequently say that she does not speak science, she has a tremendous respect for scientific research and is currently finishing a book on stress. Also, she is a singer-songwriter telling stories about the dark side of life and recovery, and you can hear her music on Spotify, which I will also plug in this week's email. That being said, Dr. J, you're up.
Hello, everybody. I think they listened to the family way in the waiting room, did they, Jeremy? I think so. Anyway, I am so happy to be here. This is a rough topic. This is the kind of topic that most of my friends would say, could we talk about the weather? But it probably is one of the topics that has informed my career more than anything. I've worked in a number of different situations where my life has been threatened. That's one of the things that happens. If you work in these types of areas with violence, people who are prone to violence, hats off to anybody who does that kind of work. So I've divided this up. It's a bit of an odd talk because I really do want to talk about COVID-19 and the situation we're in now. I want to talk about stress. I'm going to talk about toxic stress and where that word comes from, because it has everything to do with ACEs. It is part of ACEs, but with adverse childhood experiences, which certainly domestic violence is a large adverse childhood experience. I also want to make a disclaimer. If at any time during this webinar I sound drunk, I'm not. Last time people were texting in, is she loaded? Nope, not loaded, but I'm dependent on Xfinity. And I'm broadcasting now from down at UCSF in Mission Bay, because if they go out, we're all stumped. So right now, let's think about this. So right now, we are under attack. This is a microscopic parasitic enemy. We can't see it. It's vicious. It'll kill us. And really, at this point, all we have to protect ourselves is washing our hands and singing happy birthday 2 times. I like to sing, that works out. We have the ability to, I've got to say this, physical distance is not social distance. I see people. We can be social, and if we say 6 feet, I'm going to push it to 12 just for safety's sake. We also have masks that we can wear. For myself, I mean, this little enemy we have, their goal is to get inside us. That's their only job. A virus lives in a gray area. It doesn't even live. It's in a gray area between the living and the not living. And in order to replicate, it has to have a living host. And the bad news is we're the host and the virus is the party crashers. And it's just not a joke. I can't say enough about encouraging people to take this seriously. We're in a war right now. So the one area that has created a lot of problems, which I will talk about later, but the other area we've been encouraged to do is shelter in place. And for a lot of people, it's interesting. I'm getting a lot of mixed reactions. Some people really like it. Some people like they don't have to drive. Some people like that their adult kids have come home and they're staying with them and they're all working at home. Some people have, a gentleman I saw, he's a friend of mine on the street, he said it's like for him being in an ashram. I'm okay. You know, he misses his kids and everything. And some people are suffering because some people are economically challenged. Some people don't have shelter. Some people don't have food. Some people are so compromised, they're so vulnerable, they don't have a way to get away from COVID-19. They're just totally exposed. And then there's this other group, shelter in place. So I like to think about it this way. If you're a perpetrator, this is your dream. You have your Vic right there. You have your survivor. Let me make a note on that. Some people like to be called a victim, some survivor. It's interchange. I'm not going to get caught in that. It's so victim, survivor. But a perpetrator has exactly what they want right now. And for people who are being battered, they're living in violence, they're living in fear. This is their worst nightmare. And think about that. So when I was going to give this talk, I was lucky enough to talk to Lieutenant Williams, wonderful man, who is actually head of San Francisco's SV, Sexual Victims Unit. Oh, I just want to make sure what's going on, right? What are we seeing? And he confirmed my suspicions. We have no bloody idea what's going on, except Santa Clara County has an increase in family violence calls, up 46% since shelter in place started. I don't know where it is now. I mean, this stuff is not something you just see all the time. We don't put it in front of people. Makes people nervous. Well, too bad. When I talked to Lieutenant Williams, he confirmed that the first week of shelter in place, there was a 60% increase in calls to the district attorney's office. The next week it went down 30%, and that wait a minute, that 60% was compared to where a 60% increase compared to where it was last year. Sorry. Next week went down 30%. Then the next week there was a little bump up, and I sat there, you know, as I was talking to him, I said, "Go on and tell me what that is." He said, "We have no clue. We have no idea what is going on." Because it may seem easy to reach out when you're living with a perpetrator. It's not easy. So one of the things I want to say, I may say this a few times, one of the things he told me to make sure and tell people, they have set up a system where you text 911, and you not only text it, you put threat of my life, DV, trying to kill me, violence, rape. You must text the topic so that the people who respond are informed and they know how to handle it. And he said, even though our front door is closed, our doors are open. So I'm going to talk, you know, it's interesting. I forgot one thing today, and that was how I'm going to look at my notes. So excuse me if I do this. Anyway, one of the other things I want to talk about is, let's see, sorry, I'm fumbling around here where I'm going to go. So a little bit about me. I think it helps to put it in context. So for a lot of different reasons, I specialized in addiction and incest. And when I moved to California, moved to San Francisco, I met David Smith. He was a consultant at Glavin Hospital. We're talking 1979, 80. And I was asked, because I was part of sort of that incest and addiction crowd. At the time, we used the word incest. You don't even hear it now. What's it called? Family, sexual abuse, family, whatever. It's like silly. It's incest. Let's call a dog a dog. So at that time, I had published an article in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, which was at that time run through Haight-Ashbury, and it was called Chemical Dependency and Incest. And that was reflecting on experiences I'd had working in prisons. I was the alcoholism program for 2 jails, prisons in Duval County in Jacksonville, Florida. And this one particular facility was a hog farm about 15 miles from Georgia. Anybody seen Cool Hand Luke? You got it. So it's 1,000-acre hog farm, and there was a men's side and a women's side. And anybody could sign up to see me who said they had an alcohol problem. It's an alcohol diversion program. You know, a lot of these people, if you stay sober, you don't get loaded, don't get drunk, you're not coming to the farm. So this one day, I had quite the double header. Over on the women's side, a woman walked in, and I never knew what the issue was. She sat down, and I said, you know, what's going on? Why are you here? I'm Jody. And she opened her mouth. She didn't have any teeth. And it was a pretty rugged scene in there. And she said, my husband did this with the telephone receiver. I said, well, okay, well, how come you're here? I went in the bedroom, I got his gun and I shot him. Well, then I go over to the men's side, and this guy walks in, and he said, I don't belong here, hostile. I said, well, tell me why you're here. He said, I only did my right as a daddy. I put my fingers in my daughter's pussy. Well, I have to tell you, I was young and fairly naive. I said, just a minute, I'm gonna go out and talk to my team. I worked with a nurse and a social worker, and I said, I cannot deal with this dude. I said, y'all have to go on in there and handle him. And they were like, you drew it, you deal with it. Here's the thing. That first experience never left my being, ever. And one of the things that I got interested in is the covariance of alcohol, addiction, drugs, and incest. And the problem is, it's not in the literature. I don't even know what we're studying now when it comes to incest. And I need to say, incest is domestic violence. You ask anybody who's been incested if they feel it was domestic violence, and they will sign up, raise their hand, and say yes. So David Smith, Haight-Ashbury, decided at that time that we were seeing aberrant sexual practices. It was, Summer of Love was way over, and it was a time when we had a lot of problems with uppers, methamphetamine, and they were doing all kinds of weird stuff, behaviors that we just, we hadn't seen. So he got this committee together of experts, and we were going to design a questionnaire to ask questions to get at what was going on. See, that's the problem. You don't ask the questions, this stuff, nobody's going to tell you. So because I was the resident incest expert, and let me make a disclaimer here, do not tell me ever an incest joke, because I'm from Kentucky. If I hear one more incest joke, I just don't know what I'm likely to do. It's not funny. It's not funny. You would not believe how many times you know what it is. Anyway, so we're sitting around the table and we're trying to figure out how to ask difficult questions. And when it got to how do you ask somebody if you've experienced incest, everybody, it stumped the band. It was a tough one. And after a while, we finally came up with the question, who's the closest relative you've ever had sex with? Straight up. Don't fuck up, don't screw around. I don't want to do. So from that point, I was asked to do a big talk on incest, and a friend of mine was given a larger talk. It was sexual kinds of it was a talk on sexuality and whatever. It was out at the airport. And I was so young and naive, but I was doing my workshop, introductions. It turns out one side of the room was NAMBLA, National Association of Men Love Boys. The other side of the room were therapists and social workers. And within 2 seconds, the violence that erupted in my workshop was so intense. I said, we have to stop. I was incapable. I could do it now. I was incapable of dealing with it because the goal of their experience in NAMBLA is to teach children how to be sexual. So kind of fast forwarding, you know, I have had a hard time hanging out with Mary Dahlman, who I just have such great affection for her. And I think I've gone blurry here. Hope I come back. Anyway, Mary Dahlman is this amazing stress researcher. She is phenomenal, but she's a crotchety old thing. And so she agreed, her husband introduced me, she agreed, 10 years ago to hang out with me with my non-scientific brain and help me try to understand in a different context what I was seeing in my work with people. So when we talk about stress, stress is a neuroendocrine brain-body response to sensory perceptions of threat in our internal or our external environment. So what's important about that is any perception of threat, any perception. So for instance, the biggest threat a lot of us have right now, or should have, is that COVID virus trying to hop inside our mouth, our nose, infect us and kill us. I mean, that's a threat. And the problem is that that's a novel threat. The more novel the threat, the more likely you are going to have a big stress response system reaction. And the problem with our stress response system is it's really designed to, you know, go up like this. It goes up and it comes down. It goes up and it comes down. And because of, let me see, I think what happened here. I went foggy. Anyway, because of prolonged sustained stress, the stress response systems affect every system, molecule, and cell in our body at some point in time. After an aggravated, protracted, sustained stress response, something's going to break, and you can't predict when, and you can't predict what. So, you know, short-term stress is brilliantly designed to help us with this COVID virus because it helps us stay really aware, and it helps us stay informed, and it helps us respond. And so that's the short-term stress response. So the problem is now we're going into extended duration of the stress response. And that's hard because stress is really designed to have protracted period. You know, you go up and you have your stress response, but it's supposed to calm. We call it finding the gap of calm in Rwanda. So anyway, right now we're in this situation where everybody is getting more and more stressed. And what happens when we get really stressed, we tend to become less rational. Think about this relative to DV, domestic violence. So we lose our ability to regulate. We lose our ability to be rational. We lose our ability to be relational. The more stressed you become, the less capable you are of making executive function decisions. And the more likely you are to become really ensconced in your reptilian brain, which from my point of view, we really need to do something besides act like a lizard. I mean, I'm serious. And the problem is some people, when they get really, really reptilian, go to a place of lethality. And that's the issue with domestic violence. I mean, domestic violence, there's violence abuse, and then there's domestic violence. And I'll talk about that in a minute. They're different animals, but the stress response as it stays on is going to cause more and more havoc with all kinds of things. So, you know, let me talk a minute about research, because research is interesting to me. It's one of the things I love about Mary. She's And my husband is a molecular biologist and studies cell signaling. And, you know, research is important. It's part of our arsenal right now, because the only way we know where that little virus is to test for it. That's the only way we can find the enemy. You can get all the symptoms. You can hear them in the bushes and marching around and smoking cigarettes or whatever if you're in the wilderness. But the only way you know where they are is to test. And you have to do really smart scientific testing. So my field, from my point of view, has really interesting sociological research. It isn't that it is insignificant, but it is different than the kind of research that Mary particularly worked on rats. Oh, if you go to my website, drjody.com, you can see I've put up new sketches on gap of calm and on stress. And you can, it'll tell you, I think, a little bit of information about that. But I did that to honor the rats. I have a sketch artist, Judith Ogus, who's amazing. And so anyway, you can go and look at those. But rats have been one of Mary's primary animals that she worked with. And because she can study them in ways you could never study humans. So when it comes to the stress response, the rats behave pretty much the way we do if they're in certain situations. And the beauty of being able to do a study in San Francisco and you control the variables, and then they do the same study in Spain, or maybe they do the same thing in China. Yes, we could work with other researchers in other countries. It all matters, and they all get excited, especially when it comes together. So my first experience to research, and when in Jacksonville, Florida in 1973, they had no addiction treatment programs, no detoxes in the state of Florida. So my professor was in graduate school, was head of a team who was going to do a research study post detox. So Tallahassee was the middle city, Miami was the large city. I don't remember which one's the small city. And so we were given a list where we could go to find these people, to ask them, had the quality of their life improved since they had gone through detox. So my first hit up was a guy named Alvin, and he lived at the ballpark. And I said to Dr. McKay, I said, well, can you tell me where I might find Alvin? He said, well, he's likely to be over there at the oyster bar, inside if the weather's not good, but he'll be out back if I go over and I find Alvin. I pull up an oyster crate and I introduced myself. I said, Alvin, would you mind doing a little service for your community? I'd like to ask you a couple of questions now that you've been through detox. He was a veteran, non-veteran. Oh, yes, ma'am, whatever you need. Well, I said, there's one big question I need to ask you. I said, Alvin, has your quality of life improved? This is ridiculous for a man who lives in the ballpark. Has the quality of your life improved since you went through detox? And he stopped in sort of a Southern way, and he thought for a moment. He said, well, I think it has. And I said, well, question two, well, Alvin, how has it improved? Well, right now, the weather's nice. So, I meticulously wrote down the answers. I had my instructions, but it's like, that was interesting to me. But that was my first experience in a study. So I've become I question a lot of information. And why do I care about this? So right now, I really want to say, we have no idea the extent of domestic violence that we have. We have no idea what's going on. Children aren't going to school. If it comes to, violence against kids, sexual violence, rape, incest, there's nobody to see their marks. There's nobody for them to tell if they get upset what might be happening. The other thing is, with our kids locked in like this, I talk about children a little bit. The problem is when children don't sleep. So what happens with domestic violence? One of the things I've, in the business long enough, you learned a few questions you can just pull on out in a hurry. And I've worked a lot with people who grew up with really violent homes, where the flesh is banging on the wall at night, hearing mom whimper somewhere, maybe hearing their big brother go in and try to get into it and get smacked. So one of the first questions I always will ask people is, where'd you hide? Where'd you go? They'll tell you, closet, under the bed. And they would stay there hoping the perpetrator didn't come find them, didn't want to come find them, had exhausted himself. So 85% of this type of domestic violence that I'm talking about, it affects all genders, it crosses all zip codes. I'm telling stories from my own experience. So anybody, any family, any money group, any gender can have domestic violence. It's just a disclaimer. I can't cover all that. I just want you to know I'm not stupid. I get it. But in this situation, it was a father, and the little girl was wondering if he would think to come get her. And she knew what she was in for if he did, if he had not exhausted himself, fallen asleep drunk. There have been studies that have indicated that 25% of offenders, and this goes back in the day, I don't even know if they're looking at this anymore. 25% of incest offenders are alcoholic. This is back in the day. This is back in the day before we had fathers against false accusations. I think that was what it called. It scared everybody off. Quit talking about it. And the problem is with domestic violence, people will say domestic violence is not impacted by using alcohol or other drugs. And I'm like, what party are you going to? I mean, that is just not true. I mean, research studies say this. They say it's not causal. Don't get me started. So in this situation, this little girl knew that if her father came, she was interesting. She said, I'd put out little bottles outside my door so they'd knock over if he came. And then when he got there, I would look at the wallpaper and pretend I was floating. That's the world I've lived in for a lot of years and helped so many brave people. And right now, we have no idea who has access to people. Because if you're with a perpetrator, what are they going to say? Oh, baby, you just have to stay here with me. It's the law now. Nobody going out today. This is when I talked to Lieutenant Williams, he's like me. What do we have? We don't know. We can only imagine, because the victims do not have access. Maybe they can text. That's why they set that up. They can't call. They can't even go on a computer. You may not know this, but on most domestic violence websites, either in the upper corner or the lower corner, it's going to have quick exit. Because if the perp comes in, bam, you're off, and you can't see where you can't trace where they've been. That's how bad it is. People say, why don't they get help? Yeah, why don't they get help? Last person that actually left, I helped somebody. She's a sweetheart. She was referred by a colleague. Husband was pretty sophisticated professor. And he was beating the crap out of her, intimidating, scaring her. So I saw him once together. He got us into me, and I started working with her a little bit. And the hardest thing is dealing with the denial. And people just do not understand denial. Denial has a complicated relationship with the truth. Think about that. It's not that people don't know, but it's complicated. So with this woman, luckily she had resources, she had money, she had a job. I figured she could get out. She had a place to go. She had backup family. But see, sometimes think about it. Where are you going? There's an old saying that domestic violence victims who go to shelters are on a one-way street to welfare because they lose everything. They lose everything. And you think you can rebuild all of that in 6 months? How much time do we give them now? I haven't checked lately with this new situation we have in terms of stripping people that need, any type of resources. So with this woman, I said, I think you can do this. And we strategized. I said, lay low at home. Lay low. Tuck away money. Don't make your move. Let's get yourself lined up. And she was able to do that. Not everybody can. She could. Which it's an amazing experience to help someone get away and be able to go to safety. That's the other thing. Where are you going? Where are you going to shelter? That's the thing right now. I asked Lieutenant Williams, I said, where are people sheltering? You know, where are they going because of the virus? So she left. And I was supposed to see her the next week. And I got a call from a colleague. And this colleague said, you know, I probably should have told you this a couple of days ago, but I didn't think it could happen. So-and-so wants to kill you. And I said, well, that is really a tidy piece of information. I think we call that a terrorist report. And so, all right, that's not a joke. That's what happens because, you know, it's a fine line between homicide and suicide, and sometimes they go together. And I was the blame. See, what happens is I helped the victim. The victim got off the hook for a moment, and I became the target. It's not a joke. And I quit working with those kinds of cases. I work in a building at night by myself at that time. My office, a lot of times because I would stay in the evening. Nobody's there. Nobody's around. It could happen. And what happens for those of us who are caregivers, if we're thoughtful, which you are if you're in that business, you get a sense of what it's like. What is it like to live with a constant threat to your life where you're diminished, you're shamed, you're made to feel guilty for even existing? The goal is to make you be so vulnerable without agency that the power and control is easy, because that's the goal. The goal is to dominate. And I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about sexual activities that people participate in mutually because they want to. That is not what we're talking about today. So one of the things that is really interesting, I don't know if people know this, but when it comes to domestic violence, what do you look for? What are we looking for? It's interesting because one of the things that is, you know, you think if somebody's strangled, there'd be signs, wouldn't you? Turns out in San Diego, there's actually a institute on strangulation prevention. Can you imagine that? We have an institute called Strangulation Prevention, and they do trainings with police. They do trainings, emergency room doctor, anybody who's, you know, going to be a first responder, knowing the questions to ask and knowing that a lot of times somebody who's been strangled will have no marks and it can still kill them. Strangulation is the most violent act that a perpetrator will do with a victim. Asked a good friend of mine, I said, so he's in the military, so he's got all these answers. I said, so here's the deal. Is strangulation a form of torture? And he thought for a moment, and he said, well, I guess it's pretty close to waterboarding. Waterboarding. Because of the lack of oxygen. There's hypoxia and and what we now know, that what the police know, there's a bill that's been passed, SB 40, that is called a duty to inform. So if any first responder goes out, sorry, I can't give it, recently, it wasn't passed that long ago. I do think Kentucky might be one of the few states that hadn't passed this thing. I mean, it's a national movement, because when you go to a call where you know there's violence, and the person says that they've been strangled, you ask them, has anyone choked you? Has anyone put anything on your throat? Has anyone held you to the point where you passed out? Have you ever defecated or urinated, which means you're about as close to death as possible? We know the next move is likely to be homicide. And this is documented in case records. That type of offender, perpetrator, is also very likely to kill a policeman. They know this. They're also known to be involved in mass shootings. This is the kind of person, I don't like the word the definition narcissistic personality disorder, but let's go with that for a minute. This is a person who has no sense of anybody else, no empathy, only is there to be served, doesn't care what they do as long as it attends to their needs. Dangerous. Police will say a strangulator is the most dangerous man they ever go out on calls. And so what Lieutenant Williams in SVU told me, he said there has been an action within, I can't tell you which department, I don't remember what department he said, but they've called up known survivors of domestic violence just to make sure they're okay. You know, they're trying to do efforts to reach out because it's not a joke. So for a minute, I want to talk about, let me make sure I see what time it is. Oh, I've gone a long time. I was going to talk about the original, I got time to go? Am I good to keep going? Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about it. It's actually a topic in and of itself, which is ACE study, the Adverse Child Experiences study. And that study, the reason it was originally done, which maybe I have to come back and talk about it, is that Dr. Folletti realized in an obesity clinic he was running that the reason people couldn't sustain weight loss is that every other person he interviewed when he was going back trying to understand had experienced sexual violence and had been sexually abused. That's another day. I couldn't get to that. So what's the takeaway here? Ask people questions. Ask people how they're doing. Just because we're in this situation doesn't mean we can't call people. And if they say, no, I'm not doing so well. Oh, I'm sorry. What's that mean? Ask another question. And if they say, well, my partner's pretty angry. Oh, I'm sorry. What's that look like? Well, they get pretty mad. Oh, what's that like? Keep going. To determine if somebody is living in domestic violence, you must create a dialogue. You know, I go to the doctor and they say, is anybody harming you? Really? That's all you can come up with to ask me? Anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and I'm going to take questions. Anybody has questions? And thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. J. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so at this point, you guys go ahead and load any questions you have into the Q&A. We've got one from Kim, Dr. J. She says, I'd love to hear your definition of stress again.
Okie doke. So stress is a neuroendocrine brain-body response to a sensory perception of threat in our internal or external environment. Internal is what's going on in our body. External is what's around us. And the reason that sensory perception is critical, the feed in is from our senses, the sensory cortexes. The sensory information comes in from various parts into the brain, and then, oh boy, it's complicated, but hope that helps. That's the definition.
Awesome. All right, let's see. The next one is, what's the ratio difference between male and female domestic violence offenders?
Well, how do we know? We would know if you go look at criminal records, you know, they think, you know, 15 to 85%, 15 female, 85% male. I would say we have no idea. because we're not putting the resources. How much money is going into, how many, what's going on out there? I mean, the only way we know is when people present in the courts. So I wish I could tell you that. I will say this, women and men abuse equally. I mean, I just don't know the percentage. Sorry.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would assume too. And how many aren't reporting anyway? Seems like such a daunting task to try and get data on. Okay, so here's another one. I wanted to hear more about reptilian brain, lizard brain, and why these matter when thinking about domestic violence.
So the way I like to think about it is the reptilian brain is our primal brain. And what happens when we go into a state of fight or flight and freeze? Fight or flight was Walter Cannon back in 1918. They added freeze on it. We go into that sympathetic state of hyperarousal. If somebody is coming at you with a gun, you're not going to stop and go to executive function and say, gee whiz, there's a gun, it's coming in the door, what am I going to do now? You are going to react and to respond. And if you're trained in weapons or whatever, you probably have training apparatus that's operational in memory in the cortical function, the executive function. But I hope that answers, those are the two areas of the brain that are interesting to me relative to this, because when a victim is getting attacked and somebody says, well, why didn't you say something? We freeze, people freeze. There is fight, flight, and freeze. And if you're trapped, the one thing you probably do is freeze. And language is in the executive function. That's a complicated question. It's a great question. That's a talk, not for me. Calling me.
The next one is there a potential correlation between increased stress from the pandemic and the likelihood of committing domestic violence?
Well, when I was talking to the head of SVU, I mean, they're assuming, how could it not be, particularly because like I said, it's a perpetrator's dream and it's a victim's nightmare. So I just don't know how that could not work out, because they're already in trouble. So, and there's also some people, I didn't get to that. There's a continuum of domestic violence. I mean, some people just aggravated with each other and they've been cooped up, made to scream and yell, and and that's the end of it. And they never do it again, or they call their therapist and they work it out. I'm really on the other end talking about when a woman hears she's going to shelter in place, a man hears he's going to shelter in place with a potential perpetrator, that's a nightmare. What are they going to do? They can't call. That's why they have that text system set up.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, you guys, let's see. The next one, where do we tell folks to text and what words to use? Thank you for the work that you do.
Sorry, it's 911. You text 911 and put a context in. 911, life in danger. 911, violence. 911, gun, help. Simple. You may not have long to text. I would actually have people who are experiencing domestic violence and really frightened, I would have you know what you're going to text. Think that through. How fast can your thumbs move?
Perfect. Thank you. And let's see. The next one is, what is the most effective way to help someone experiencing DV?
One of the things they've found, and people know this in recovery, if a person who's experiencing that level of violence and domestic violence, if they can tell their story to one person, it increases the likelihood of them being able to move out of denial. I mean, that's the first step, and that's telling your story in a 12-step meeting. Why do you do that? Because it helps you stay in reality about what's happening to you. The problem is, a lot of people can't hear it. Victims, survivors are ashamed. It's not something, you go to a party and say, wow, look at what's happened to me. I mean, there's a school where my kids went to, and a woman had a black eye. She had a 3-week-old baby. Her story was the baby rolled over and black eye. It's like, are you kidding? And I told the head of the school, I said, come on. This is ridiculous. So the hardest thing is to be able to stay in the story, get a person to talk. And if they can tell the whole story, that's why hotlines are so important. They can't call hotlines now because they're in shelter. So good question.
Great question. Thank you. Okay, next one. How do you describe post-acute withdrawal, reptilian brain, fight or flight, and do you correlate recovery with domestic violence?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean about what was it? Post-acute reptilian? I don't know. I don't think about it that way. So
yeah,
sorry.
how do you describe post-acute withdrawal, reptilian brain, or maybe try rephrasing that question. I'm having a hard time following it too.
Yeah, maybe send that in. Try that another way, because from my point of view, I don't, that doesn't all wrap around for me. It's not about you. Maybe I just don't understand. Remember, I don't speak science.
I had a question, Dr. J. What could people like us do to be of support? What can we do? People watching, the four of us, what are things that we can do to help?
Well, I suspect you're already doing it. I mean, you guys are a pretty dialed in crowd. You're talking about the panel, you're talking about the audience. I mean, the biggest thing is to be curious. The biggest thing is to say hi. The biggest thing is to if people look odd and act odd and they have any kind of apparent injury, a lot of times you don't see apparent injuries, or they're crying all the time. Ask people what's going on. That's one of the best things we can do for those of us in the business. And you have to learn how to hang out in this. This is ugly. It's scary. I don't like being attacked. I don't like being threatened. But if you choose this, that's going to happen. So,
Dr. J, I have a question too. What do you think about, or how would you categorize sort of, I guess, domestic violence if there's no physical contact, or do you look at that differently?
Oh, no. Yeah, good question. So intimidation, calling people names, stripping them down. You don't have to touch somebody to, use nasty words, attack the children verbally, say things that you're going to do to the kids, threaten to kill the pets, threats, domination. And it can be, words are as nasty. Words in some ways are worse in a way. It's complicated. They're worse than the physical violence. And I hesitate to say it that way, but words are awful. You can attack it, but that's what they do when they torture people. They use a lot of language to strip people down. Hope that is that good?
All right, here's the next one. This is from Yamil. She says, "Hi, Dr. Jody. You can swear a little if you want." And actually, I had a few people saying the same thing. So I think talking about domestic violence is worth swearing at, I think. She says, "Can you please explain violence abuse in domestic violence?" Hopefully I'm making sense.
Explain violence, abuse, and domestic violence. Well, domestic violence is the old one. Then we came with intimate partner violence. And domestic violence really was just designed, thinking about a domesticated living situation. So that's the way they thought of a traditional home in the old days, whatever home is now. That's what domestic violence is. It's violence that's occurring within a home. It could be sibling to sibling. It could be wife to son. It could be father to sister, to daughter. I mean, it's happening within that living situation. Not necessarily, what is a family today? But where people are committed to being in a living situation together. Now, violence can occur. You go out on a date. You can be date raped. You can be, violence is something that can happen anywhere at any moment in different situations. What was the other one? Was there another? Abuse. Well, violence is a form of abuse. I'm not sure if I can say that better. Well, that's it.
All right. Thank you very much. And let's see. When will your book come out? It sounds like something we could really use right now.
Listen, I just put up 4 more songs. I have a new album up on you can hear my music on my website. It's called Sweet Grit. That's me. And I'm going to get it out. I'm on chapter 7. I have 2 more to go, but I would so much rather write music and songs. I'm a singer-songwriter. I will do it. Thank you for asking. Let's say by next year.
By next year, Dr. J.
Come on now.
All right, we'll be patient. We'll be patient.
The average length of time I think is like 8 to 10 years. So I'm
All
on
right,
it.
you're ahead. You're ahead. Okay, if abuse is happening to the parent, but the children witness it, hear it, are they too being abused?
Well, that's ACEs. That's the adverse childhood experience. And we should probably just do a webinar on that. I know Shannon has mentioned it. I mean, that's an animal in and of itself that's fabulous. Our Attorney General, Nadine Burke-Harris, is all about looking at adverse childhood experiences. And that's where toxic stress comes in. So there's positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. Children who live in that level of war zone, I call that a war zone, they're hearing it, they're witness abuse. So it really affects the developmental architecture of the brain. It affects, here's one, if a child is up all night listening to things that really go badly bump in the night and they go to school, guess what? They're not going to be able to focus. They may fall asleep. They actually might be distracted. And boy, they look like they have ADD and could sign up for some stimulant work. I just exercise a little caution when you're thinking a child looks like they're distracted and they're falling asleep or not paying attention, to ask, what's going on at home? You able to sleep at night? You getting something to eat? Don't get me started.
Perfect. Thank you. And last question. Last question. In a situation where victims are scared of reporting their perpetrators for both culture and immigration status, feeling like if I report him, he can be deported or he'll be jailed and I will be the only person to take care of our family. Have you worked with such cases, and do you have any insight on how to support people in such an environment?
That's a rough one. Have I worked with people who will have nothing if they report because they don't have a job, they don't have any access to money? I mean, being an immigrant is a particularly difficult situation. I mean, depending on your status, because, from my point of view, people are under attack for that. So it's hard. I think you have to go within, that's a long answer. That in and of itself would be a great topic because it's complicated and it is scary. Just making a phone call, you could be on a plane to wherever. Your kids could be taken away and blown back to wherever they came from. It's awful. It's just terrible. So that's not a quick answer. And when I talked to the SBU, the department head, we were talking about that. There's a lack of resources for a lot of people right now. And that would be one group. And yes, a lot of people don't report. They have to take the licks and the fear and the trauma because they don't know what they're going to do if the perpetrator goes to prison, or they could all get deported. Now, great question. Big topic.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. J. That's it for the questions, you guys. Thank you so much for those questions. They were really, really great. Dr. J, do you want to plug where people can find you and get more resources?
So my website is easy, drjody.com, drjody.com. And you can write me there if you want to send me an email. I think my business, no, you can write me and then I can get back to you. Yeah, anybody wants to write a question. I mean, they're great questions. Feel free.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, and like I said at the beginning of the webinar, guys, we are going to put a bunch of domestic violence related resources in this week's email. So feel free to share that with anybody you feel would need it. And we're going to have that survey working so you can share with us how you feel about the webinars, any topics that you'd like us to cover in the future. I think that'd be really good. We'd love your feedback. Also, if you're interested in presenting, you can email us at info@recoverywebinars.com and we'll have you on here to share your message. That being said, panelists, do you have any closing thoughts?
I'm just really grateful that you came and did this with us, Dr. Jody. And it's such a heavy topic. It's really a heavy topic. And I'm you know, it's you brought some simplicity to us, which is be curious, ask questions, and engage people. Where I think sometimes with this topic, like I might feel I'm kind of powerless. What would I do about that? So there was so much helpful information. And I'm super grateful for your time. And I also want to just say to everybody that's still on with us, Jeremy does a recording of these webinars and you can have it. And so our idea with this is to share. So please take anything you want from any of the webinars, take the webinars, share them with people, share the resources. The idea is to just give away these resources that we feel that we are so blessed to have, and please share. That's the whole intent and purpose of our days together on Tuesdays. So thank everybody for being here, and grateful for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yeah, if you're also interested in ways that you can help, you can also email me. I have a friend of mine, a dear friend. Her name is Carrie, and she works at Elevate, which is a rehab here in Watsonville. And she basically has volunteered her nights and weekends for over a year now on a crisis hotline, helping women in difficult situations. So I really want to applaud her efforts because she is literally my hero. And also, if you're interested in participating in that kind of work, get in touch with me and I'll connect you with the right people. That being said, we're going to sign off. So make sure you take care of yourselves this week. Take care of each other. And we will be back next Tuesday, same time, same place. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.